you hear now?
Oh, goodness.
All right.
Yay. Thanks, Ruth.
All right. There we go. All
Man,
right.
that
We will
introduction
minimize
was
that chat again now. Go.
that introduction was so good. Like, I
It
don't
was
know if
perfect.
I could
We'll
do it. I
fix
mean,
it in post.
we'll
Good thing
fix
we're
it
not
in
live.
post. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Mark and I are super excited to talk about infinite and licensing questions and all sorts of fun stuff. We collected questions from the community and our infinite creators as well. So we'll be going through those very shortly. But first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Mark. Mark, tell me about yourself.
Hello, I'm Mark Moreland. I am Paizo's Director of Brand Strategy. I've been with Paizo for over 13 years. In that time, I've worn a lot of hats. Now I mostly wear a hat to cover up my balding head. And my job here is to help coordinate both our internal releases and sort of brand arc with our licensees, folks like Meredith and our other partners, to ensure that we're presenting Pathfinder and Starfinder consistently and in the best possible light across all media forms. So
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Hello, I'm Meredith Gerber. I am oh my gosh, what do I do? Drive-through RPG Partner Relations Manager. I also am the rep for Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite, and I get to work with Mark a whole lot. Been doing this for almost a decade, which is pretty rad. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for having me. And Mark, thanks for being here.
yeah, no
Really
problem.
appreciate it.
So I do want to start just by thanking fans and the community. Last Tuesday, we put up a blog that basically explained a one of the many policies that's involved in Pathfinder Infinite and Starfinder Infinite, specifically about how the orc license was going to function, or specifically how it wasn't going to be used on the Infinite platform. Licensing is a super arcane thing. There's a reason that lawyers have to go to school for years to learn this stuff. It's not something that comes intuitively to a lot of people. And so I just want to thank everyone sort of for bearing with us as we have to pull back the curtain a little bit on some of what is normally behind the scenes of RPG publishing and creation. And hopefully as time goes on, some of these things will just become second nature to folks, and it won't involve quite as much hair pulling and gnashing of teeth and cursing at the sky as people wonder what do about IP concerns.
Absolutely.
So just for clarity, none of what we're talking about today is legal advice. Meredith and I are not lawyers. Nothing here establishes attorney-client privilege, not least of which because we are not attorneys, and therefore we couldn't do that. So if you have legal questions about a license, your best bet is always to consult with your own attorney. There are a number of guides that break this stuff down that again are not the same as having your own attorney. There are community members who are more versed in this, who can offer you some guidance. But if you are publishing your own material, it is your responsibility to ensure that you are not violating someone else's copyright. And it is always ultimately you and your counsel's job to do that. We will try and explain the policies and the licenses in a way that is accessible to lay people. But there's only so much of that we can do. I mean, licenses are they're verbose, and they are worded a specific way for a reason, which is that those will stand up in court. Whereas me saying you can do that, you can't do that, doesn't have that same legal weight. And so at the end of the day, the licenses are the ultimate documents that say what you can and can't do, not our FAQ, not me, not Meredith. So bear that in mind. So I wanted to start with a little bit, just a sort of general discussion of how licensing works. I think for a lot of people, they go to the game store and they pick a book up off the shelf and they go home and they play with it. And that's sort of how they interact with that material. And they're not necessarily on a daily basis looking at the legal text in the back of a document to determine whether it's released under the OGL or the ORC or Infinite license or what have you. Licensing is a way for someone who owns a piece of intellectual property. In this case, we're talking about Pathfinder and Starfinder, to share that content with someone else so that that person has the right to copy it. That's what copyright is, the term that it is. It means that you have the right to copy that material and sell it or change it or whatever. The purpose of the licenses is to maintain ownership of each bit of copyrighted material that the person who created it. So the intent is to say, I'm sharing this with you, but here is what I still own. And I'm the one who owns it. And then it's to allow non-copyright holders the ability to copy or reference that material legally and with clearly defined permissions and restrictions. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, that, you know, there's a reason that documents are pages long, and define sort of, you have this right, but not that right, and this right and that right, is that the goal is clarity, so that there's no question about whether you have the right to use something you don't own or not. So I like to think in metaphor. I tend to think in metaphor. My 4-year-old will tell you that I often explain things in convoluted ways that make it more convoluted. So for that, I apologize. But when trying to think about how to sort of explain all of this, I kept coming back to this idea that like rubber duckies. Everyone loves rubber duckies. So I have a note here in the show notes to put the rubber ducky metaphor here. So buckle up. So think of each piece of copyrighted material, whether that's a character name or a feat or a location, a piece of art, anything that someone creates and releases. Think of each of those individual sort of quantum elements as a rubber duck. And the product in which they are released is a given pool of water. So in the case of the Pathfinder Player Core, we have a very large, multi-hundred page pool of water that's full of a whole bunch of rubber ducks. Each of those rubber ducks is a different color, and that color is defined by who created it, who owns that rubber duck. Out of that pool flow a number of different channels, and these rubber ducks are magic rubber ducks, so one rubber duck can go out of the pool by multiple channels. One of those channels is the ORC license, which is a free public, open source license that was created earlier this year, sort of in response to some of the OGL questions and drama at the start of the year. A bunch of publishers, over 1,000, all participated in a Discord in a process to try and refine what could be an industry-wide system neutral replacement for the OGL. And starting with Pathfinder Player Core and Pathfinder GM Core, Paizo is now releasing rules under the ORC. So that's one of the channels that flows out of those books. Another channel that flows out of them is the this is such a long name for a license. The Community Content Agreement for Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite. That's the actual name of the license that you agree to when you publish on Infinite. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to call it the Infinite license for the rest of the show. The Infinite license is another one of those. They're basically any of the rubber ducks that are in the Player Core or GM Core flow out of the flow out of the Pathfinder Infinite channel. That means you can use pretty much anything from those books, with the exception of art or trade dress. But any of the words, Paizo has already made sure that all of the ducks in that pool are ours. We have taken all of the ducks that we inherited from upstream from Wizards of the Coast or from Green Ronin or from whoever else that we pulled information into Pathfinder through the OGL in the past, we've taken those out of the player core and GM core. And that means that we know that when something is streaming out of this book through either the Orc channel or the Infinite channel, that Paizo is the copyright holder of that. And that gives us more ability to define how that content can be used. The Orc allows people to use rules. And for most people, that's going to be perfectly fine. That's going to do what they want. And that is one option. If someone wants to use additional material that the Orc does not allow, such as our setting, our characters, some of our art, they want to use the Pathfinder Infinite Marketplace, then they have to use the Infinite license. And that comes with different rules. In the same way that you use a hammer if you want to put in a nail, and you use a screwdriver if you want to screw in a screw, and they don't really work on the other kind of attachment device. You pick the tool that's going to work for what you want. In this case, the Orc, if you just want the rules, or Infinite, if you want the rules plus other stuff. Where the complication comes in is that Pathfinder's been around for 16 years. And up until last week, everything we published was published under the open game license. That meant that everything we were publishing had things both flowing into it that we didn't own, and had things flowing out of it into a license that we're no longer using. Luckily, everything that we created ourselves, whether that is a specific character or a location or a deity or what have you, we own those. Those did not flow into our pool. Those were created by Paizo, so we can license that material through whichever license we want to use, whether that's the Orc or whether that's the OGL or whether that's the Infinite license or a bespoke license that we have with a video game developer or a translator or whatever. I mean, we own it, so we can license it as many different ways to as many different people as we want. The things that we have to release through the OGL are game rules that came from an OGL source upstream. So that means something like the Owlbear, which was invented in D&D, that we were able to publish for 15 years because we used the OGL. We cited all of those as, hey, in this book, it contains things that came from the 3.5 SRD. Here's where you can find that document. We're no longer doing that, which means that anything that we have in our setting and have built upon in our world that is built on that foundation, we have to move away from. And that also means that if Pathfinder Infinite creators are publishing without using the OGL, they also have to move away from that. And so when it came time for us to update the Infinite license or figure out how we were going to handle this situation of Paizo switching from using the OGL as our foundational open content license to using the Orc, the question came down to, how do we do this in a way that is least confusing to everyone? And unfortunately, when it comes to IP law, there is no way that's not confusing. It just is what it is. But because everything that we own is already licensed to you as an Infinite creator through the Infinite license, we don't actually need the Infinite license, or we don't actually need the Orc license in order for you to be able to use that. We don't actually even need the OGL for you to use content that was OGL compatible, as long as it was created exclusively by us. So that would be something like the Inventor class. That is, for the most part, and I have not gone through super detailed to see, but that's not based on something that came from another publisher. We created that. And while we did release it into the OGL, we still retain the copyright for that. And so we can grant you the right to use that thing as well through the Infinite license. And so The one thing we just have to make sure of is that no one is accidentally taking something that Paizo doesn't own and moving it from the Infinite license, or moving it from the OGL to the orc, because neither the OGL nor the orc really allow you to do that. The simplest way for Cattail, hello kitty.
This is Banjo.
Oh, she's wearing headphones. She can't even hear me. All right. The simplest way to do that is to ensure that if you're getting content you didn't create on Infinite, that you know that it's coming from a single license. To go back to the metaphor where you've got the multiple pipes flowing out of the pool, if the same rubber duck is going through both the orc and the Infinite pipes, when you use it in your pool, which pipe did that rubber duck come through? Well, both. It just adds extra complexity, and so in discussions internally and with our attorneys on how the best way to handle this was, we came to the conclusion that we didn't need the orc in order for the Infinite license to do what we want it to do, and so we're not going to overcomplicate things by adding a second license into the mix if you're making non-OGL derivative content. Is everyone thoroughly confused now?
I don't think so. A lot of people said they like your metaphor.
Okay, great. Good. Metaphor win. Okay. And with that, we're done with the stream. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming, Mark. Thanks for having me. It's been great to see everybody.
So I've talked enough. I think, again, we're not taking live questions during the show. We've received plenty of questions already in the last week. And thank you to everyone who submitted those, whether that was on our forums, through DMs, through social media, Reddit, Discord, what have you. We were watching all those channels. I was doing my best to respond to people on there, but I know that that type of thing can get lost in the scroll over time, and so we're doing this. Some of these will be repeat questions that I've already answered, but I want this video to be able to be a reference people come back to in the future if they have questions about this sort of thing. And you can always continue to ask questions on the Paizo forums, on that blog if there's something else that you want a direct answer to. So with all that said, let's get into the first of these questions.
All right, here we go. Mark, you ready?
I'm ready.
If we publish an Infinite product based on the Paizo orc product, we don't need any additional license beyond the Infinite license?
That's the intent of our decision. Yeah. Since we know that nothing in an orc licensed Paizo product contains any material whose copyright belongs to someone other than Paizo, anything in the orc license, anything in an orc licensed Paizo product should already be covered by the Infinite license itself.
All right, Mark, if we use open game content from a Paizo OGL product, we have to publish it under both OGL and Infinite license as normal?
Only if that open game content belongs to someone other than Paizo or another Infinite creator. There's a lot of open game content that Paizo owns outright, like the Inventor class I mentioned before, or the Pathfinder 2nd edition chase mechanics. The fact that these rules expressions happen to have been released as open game content in the past doesn't change the fact that they belong to Paizo. So Paizo can license them to you via the Infinite license, in addition to licensing them to the general public as part of the OGL, or we could release them as under the orc as well. I mean, we own them, so we can release them however and whenever we want. You only need to publish an Infinite product under the OGL if there's some element of your release that doesn't belong to Paizo, like if it includes an owlbear or a plane called the Abyss. We have renamed the Abyss in our setting, so you can avoid needing to use the OGL if you're using OGL safe alternative names for the same concept.
Good.
Yeah, we're good.
Cool.
Next question. Let's go.
Okay, I'm going. Okay. All right. What is stopping Paizo from using the previous Infinite license, switching orc for OGL?
So first, there is no previous Infinite license. The Infinite license actually didn't change. That's one thing that when I acquired to our council and I was like, hey, we're introducing the orc. We don't think maybe we need to use the orc. What needs to change in this license? He came back to me and he said nothing. The Infinite license already says that you can't append other licenses to it. It already grants access to this same stuff. So we don't actually need to make any changes. So the only change that we've ever made to the end user license agreement for Infinite has been changing the name of the company from Drive-Thru RPG to Roll20, right, Meredith? That's
That's the only thing.
And that's simply because Roll20 and Drive-Thru merged, and the name of the top level company that you're actually licensing the content from changed. But we haven't made any changes to the license itself. So just as a point of clarity, there is no previous Infinite license. It's the same one it's always been. But to answer the question more directly, nothing is stopping us from going in and changing references to the OGL to references to the orc in that license. We could do that, but our desire is to clean up the license instead of repeating a complication that we sort of had to introduce when our entire game was still fundamentally entangled with non-Paizo IP. And now that the remaster is out and will continue to come out here over the next few months, we're moving to a position where Paizo no longer has to or will be using or referencing open game content that other companies own. So rather than confuse the issue with multiple licenses in play at once for the same material, we're just not going to introduce the orc into the landscape.
Cool. Yeah, and I want to reiterate on that. Yeah, that's the only thing that did change. Sorry, Rue's just like firing questions. So we're just gonna jump in.
Spoiler.
Spoiler. But yeah, that was the thing is all community content programs too. Rue, I'm so sorry. All community content programs got that update too. Just want to reiterate from Drive-Thru to Roll20. That's the only change that happened. And while we did also have some FAQ updates that not related to the content and licensing, that's more of we tightened up essentially on questions that we got a lot, or provided some visuals and things like that. But yeah, backing up, Mark. Okay, Rue, you may now hit the question button.
Keep it moving, Meredith. Jeez.
Oh my gosh, Mark. Jeez. Okay.
All right.
Mark, if you want to publish in Galarian, it must be with the old OGL content and on Infinite.
The OGL is not required to utilize Galarian. In fact, all of the specific setting information we've ever released is expressly not covered by the OGL. It's what the OGL calls product identity with capital P and capital I. Anytime you see a capitalized word that isn't someone's name in a contract, it generally means that this is a legally defined term elsewhere in the contract that tells you exactly what product identity means. So in this case, product identity is something that the OGL says, I am not sharing this. You do not have permission to use the following things that I am defining as product identity. So because our setting is defined as product identity and has been in every OGL product we've ever released, you need a license like Infinite license to publish that material at all. You only need to use the OGL in an Infinite release if you're using something that originated in a publication that Paizo or another Infinite creator didn't make, like if it has an owlbear or a bag of holding or a Holy Avenger or whatever. There's a long list. There's a whole SRD of stuff that other people have made. So your best bet when publishing anything on Infinite is to look at the if you're publishing anything on Infinite that's based on an orc, a Paizo orc release, you don't really need to check the provenance of any of that material because we've already done that for you. If you're publishing something like, say you want to do an adventure set in Falcon's Hollow. To date, everything that we've done in Falcon's Hollow has been in an OGL release. So you'll want to look at the OGL section 15, which is at the bottom of the long wall of text of the OGL itself in any OGL product. And that will cite any sources that were that flowed downstream into that product. So in the case of Hollow's Last Hope, which was the first time we ever did anything with Falcon's Hollow, you'll look at the section 15 on Hollow's Last Hope, and it'll say the 3.5 SRD. It might list a few other sources. I think that one probably just says the SRD. You'll then want to go back to the SRD that it's citing, and you'll just want to make sure that none of the terms that appear in your product first appeared in that product. So it's a little extra work for you to ensure that none of the elements, none of the rubber ducks that you are pulling from that OGL source material originated upstream of Paizo. Is basically it. Sometimes that's super easy to figure out, like anything that we used that was published in the Tome of Horrors, which was like 2003, I want to say. It was very early in the OGL era, by Necromancer Games, which is now Frog God Games. The Tome of Horrors, they had a special agreement with Wizards of the Coast that let them publish monsters from the original Fiend folio. Because at the time, Wizards was like, we're never going to do anything with these monsters, so you guys can use them. And part of the agreement was that they had to cite each of those creatures by name to say who created the original. The original Fiend folio had a whole bunch of material that had been pulled from fan creations in magazines. So it's not like they could just say created by Gary Gygax, because some of them were created by completely different people. And so the Flump, for example, is something that first appeared in Fiend folio, that was added to the OGL in Tome of Horrors, and that we have used in the past in Pathfinder material. And when we do, we say Flump from Tome of Horrors, copyright 2003, Necromancer Games. So you know, for example, that the Flump is something you can only use if you're using the OGL. Some things are harder to tell because they don't have that granular level of credit, in which case you're going to want to go back to the 3.5 SRD or Book of Fiends, or whichever book is being cited, and say, Clipoth, is Clipoth in this thing? Well, Clipoth is not in the 3.5 SRD. So if that's the only book that's cited in the section 15 you're referring to, then you're probably safe. But if it is referring to Book of Fiends by Green Ronin, Clipoth in there, we used through the OGL. You can't use those without the OGL. So again, it's a little bit arcane. There's a lot of people in the community who are very well versed in doing this level of investigation upstream to see who owns what. So if you're publishing something and you're not sure, I encourage you to find someone who can just read your product over and say, whoa, dude, you got to change that treasure trove, because you can't mention a bag of holding in a non-OGL product, because that's a D&D thing. But yeah, if you're publishing in Galarian, you only need to use the OGL if you're using open game content stuff in Galarian.
Okay. Awesome.
That was a very long answer for a very short question.
It's okay. Rue, can you hit our next question? Rue's great. Everyone give a round of applause for Rue.
Yay, Rue.
Mark, if I publish something that does contain Galarian IP, does it have to be on Infinite?
Paizo currently has 2 public licenses that allow other parties to use Galarian, the Infinite license and the community use policy. The latter one does not allow for commercial use. So if you're going to be selling your product, or if you're a commercial entity, if you have registered yourself and your buddies as an LLC to publish material, even if you're giving that material away for free, you're technically still considered a commercial entity. Or if you have a website, for example, where it's not just your own blog, it's actually a business. Then that's considered commercial use, and you can't use Galarian without another license. But the Infinite license does that. The Infinite license allows you to sell content based on our protected IP. For transparency, the community use policy is going to have some changes in the near future that we're not really going to be discussing until they've passed legal and internal review. So the version of that license that exists today likely won't be the same one that exists in a few months. If someone is watching this down the road, hello future, the spirit of that is going to remain the same, but there will be some changes to that license, and so you can find that at paizo.com/community use. I should have planned ahead and found the actual URL, but who can remember those? Maybe one of the mods in chat will be able to put the actual link there in chat for folks. But yeah, if you're using Galarian, you either need to publish it on Infinite or you need to publish it under the community use policy, in which case you can't sell it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Next question. If you want to publish with Orc Remaster, it cannot go on Infinite. And if so, it cannot reference anything from Galarian Paizo's non-Orc covered content.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the overlapping licenses cause confusion. When we say we're not going to allow the Orc to be used on Infinite, that isn't to say no content that is also released under the Orc can be used. It just means you literally cannot include the Orc license in your release, and therefore you can't pull things from upstream that were released exclusively under the Orc. So if there's a third-party publisher who makes, and this was requested of me after I used this example in a previous thing, if someone makes the Pizza Folk, and the Pizza Folk were published by, Pizzas R Us publishers, and that's released under the Orc, you can make as many different derivatives of that content using the Orc as you want, but you can't bring the Pizza Folk into Galarian because people in Galarian don't like pizza, or because of licensing reasons. So if someone creates the Pizza Folk in an Infinite product, then anyone else publishing an Infinite can make their own version of Pizza Folk, as long as those releases are also on Infinite, because the Pizza Folk concept has not been released through a more open license like the Orc or the OGL. So in this case, you can totally publish content on Infinite that's based on the Pathfinder remaster. Paizo owns that content in full. We've already put in the time stripping anything that required the use of the OGL out of it in order to ourselves release it under the Orc. So since Paizo owns it, the Infinite license gives you permission to use it. And it can reference stuff that came before the Orc or the remaster, so long as those elements are Paizo's to license to you. If that's the Gunslinger class or the Sandpoint Devil or Conrasu, or literally thousands, tens of thousands of things we created over the last 15 years for Pathfinder that didn't come from upstream. Those are completely allowed for you to use, even though they weren't themselves in a remaster product.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Mark. Next question. If I make a product that uses the Orc SRD and it's set in Galarian, is it Orc and Infinite and thus bound by both?
So this is something that I've seen come up a number of times across multiple platforms of people referring to the Orc SRD. An SRD is a system reference document, which can be licensed by the Orc, but the Orc itself is not attached to any specific IP. The Orc has already been used by Chaosium to release one of their games. They've said that they're going to continue releasing their new stuff under the Orc in the future. That's the choice of each publisher, what content they want to release via the Orc. So the Orc itself does not have an SRD the same way that the OGL had the 3.5 SRD, or the current version, most recent version of the OGL has the 5th edition SRD. That that SRD was sort of baked into those licenses so that it's impossible to use the OGL without also citing that as a source, even if you're not actually using any material that comes from it. So yeah, so when someone refers to the orc SRD, I assume they mean the body of Pathfinder material that has been released under the orc. But again, that's a term that I'm not fully sure on because it doesn't really exist. So yeah, so let me think. Where was I going with my train of thought? So yeah, so the org provides a legal framework by which a creator can release some of their IP, usually game rules, for others to use without needing to pay a lawyer to craft a custom license. It's also a license that allows creators to use other people's IP under certain conditions, so long as that IP is designated as capital licensed material under the org. Paizo hasn't released any of Galarian as licensed material. So if you want to use any element of our setting in your work, you're going to need the Infinite license to gain permission to do so.
Thank you, Mark. Next question. If we use settings or characters, etc., but no open game content from a Paizo OGL product, we don't have to publish it under OGL with the Infinite license. If so, is it the Infinite license that allows us to do that, not the OGL?
Correct. Next question.
All right, very good.
I like these short ones.
Yeah, when I saw that, it just says correct.
Yeah.
In the previous setup under the OGL, a setting neutral game mechanic, which happens to be included as part of a book on Infinite, was available for third-party publishers.
The OGL, like the orc, can't be changed by a secondary license. We can't make a license that says we're making the following changes to the orc. I mean, the orc is baked. It's done. So the Infinite license's exclusivity. Let me learn to talk here. Okay, the Infinite license's exclusivity clause and the OGL's share alike requirement, they butt heads. They're at odds with each other. That does allow non-Infinite publishers to access any open game content that was released on Infinite. That's part of why we're disallowing the orc on Infinite, so that we aren't introducing any more loopholes in licensing interactions that bypass that exclusivity. It's just sort of, our game was based on the OGL. We couldn't publish any Pathfinder stuff ourselves without using the OGL. So we sort of had to adapt Drive-Thru's existing community content program license to allow for the orc, which is why our EULA is a little bit different than others, because a lot of other games that have these types of programs are based on proprietary systems that they fully owned. And so we had to make that concession when we launched the program. Now that Paizo as a brand and as a game are moving away from the OGL, we don't have to make that concession anymore, because we're no longer building our game on the foundation of someone else's IP.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Next question. Say I want to publish third-party rules for PF2R with no setting IP. Is that the Pathfinder compatibility license?
Could be. The Pathfinder compatibility license is the first time we're mentioning it in the show, so I will give a little bit of context. The OGL restricts your ability when publishing an OGL product to use someone else's trademarks. It explicitly says, if you're publishing an OGL book, you can't say, this book is compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. This book is compatible with Pathfinder. This book is compatible with Mutants and Masterminds, or whatever. It requires that you get that permission to use someone else's trademark. In our case, Pathfinder is a registered trademark of Paizo. In order for you to use that trademark under the OGL, you had to use a separate license. So we created the compatibility license, which said, hey, if you're publishing something that's actually compatible with our game, it's not a GURPS game that you just want to put the Pathfinder logo on. If it's actually compatible with our game, here are the ways you can do that. And we, the license outlines which trademarks you can use and how you can use them. Like the community use policy, we're going to be updating that in the near future, hopefully making it simpler, because right now we have a Pathfinder First Edition, a Starfinder, a Pathfinder Second Edition compatibility license as 3 separate things. We would potentially have to have a 4th one for remastered compatibility, and then we have Pathfinder Second Edition or Starfinder Second Edition coming soon. I don't really want 5 licenses out there that all do the same thing. So the goal that we're aiming for is to consolidate all the compatibility licenses into one umbrella compatibility license, wherein you're simply using the trademark that applies to what your game is compatible to. Anyway, the suggested product of something that's just game mechanics and not setting could be released under compatibility license. You wouldn't be able to sell that product on Infinite. Infinite requires that you release it under the Infinite license. But if you don't have any setting material in it anyway, that is a choice you could make. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. Infinite content is only sold at Drive-Thru RPG. It's not sold on the Paizo website.
Correct.
Well, technically it's only sold on Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite, if you want to get technical.
Yeah, but that is
yes.
subdomain of the larger Drive-Thru
yes.
RPG domain. And I think some of this confusion comes from the fact that some of the store user interface does pull content from Infinite to show outside of Infinite and vice versa. So like when you're on the Infinite storefront, it shows content that is, say, a German translation of Pathfinder, an official Pathfinder book. That's not technically a Pathfinder Infinite release, but the way that the store works is that it's looking for Pathfinder content and pulling it into Infinite. So I can see some confusion there, but it is only sold on Drive-Thru. I mean, that's what the agreement between Paizo and Roll20 is that Roll20 is allowed to host a community content program called Pathfinder Infinite or Starfinder Infinite under the terms of our license with them. And as part of that, they have permission to enter into an agreement with publishers using the community content agreement for Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite. I said I wasn't going to use it again.
You did it. You did the thing.
Using the Infinite license. So the Infinite license is a license between the publisher and Drive-Thru, and the establishment of the Infinite marketplace is a license between Paizo and Drive-Thru. So that's the reason that they're only sold there. If you want to sell your stuff on Paizo.com, you can release that under the ORC or the OGL and use the compatibility license. And then you can sell it on our store the same way you could sell it wherever you want, because we don't have restrictions on that with those licenses.
Yep. Thank you, Mark, for taking the time to explain that.
That's what I'm here for. How are we on time? Oh, there's no way we're getting through this in just another 15 minutes. We could try. You're gonna have to rapid fire. You just gotta go. You ready? All right. My permission man, Mark, here we go.
Mark, if I make a whole new RPG that uses the ORC SRD, then that is ORC and not needing Pathfinder compatibility license nor Infinite.
Again, there's no ORC SRD, but what you're describing isn't something that you could release on Infinite anyway, as it's a new RPG. Everything on Infinite needs to be either be a non-game product like fiction, or compatible with a version of Pathfinder or Starfinder. So it's not really germane to this conversation. But yeah, a whole new RPG wouldn't belong on Infinite or be eligible for the compatibility license, because it would be a new thing and not compatible with Pathfinder.
Great answer. Okay. Is there a reason why Infinite's license cannot be done away with and have it solely under the ORC?
We can't edit the ORC. to add extra provisions of the Infinite Marketplace to the license, in the same way that you need a Pathfinder compatibility license to add to the work in order to use Paizo's trademarks, like the Pathfinder compatibility logo. You need something beyond just the orc to access our setting IP. And so the Infinite Marketplace also, like I said before, isn't Paizo's, it's drive-throughs or Roll20's. And so we license them permission to run the marketplace. So they need a specific agreement with publishers that outlines the terms of the marketplace beyond just ownership of the content within the products themselves.
Awesome. All right. Everything published under the Infinite license can be used by other authors and publishers in their own products, but only if published under Infinite license?
Yeah, if the original content was derivative of the OGL source, any downstream Infinite releases also need to be released under the OGL, and so thus they can't include game mechanics from a non-OGL source. But to prevent orc rules from bleeding into the OGL landscape. But yeah, anything you create and release on Infinite can be used by other Infinite creators, but not beyond that, except through the OGL loophole.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question. Is the orc's main incompatibility with Infinite that orc requires / grants non-exclusivity while Infinite requires exclusivity?
That's a complication. Yeah. It's also that the Infinite license already grants Infinite publishers access to everything Paizo has released under the orc. So rather than confuse the issue of whether you gain the right to publish a Mirage Dragon, for example, under the orc or Infinite, we're just clarifying that the Infinite license is the one giving you permission to use that Paizo IP and not the orc. The Mirage Dragon is the same either way, but there's no downstream leakage of that IP via Infinite, while there would be via the orc. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Next question. Is it possible to allow your material to be used by people on both Infinite and beyond?
No. When you publish content, you have to decide where you want to release it. If it's released on Infinite, you're agreeing to an exclusivity clause in exchange for access to Paizo's setting material and the marketing benefits of using the Infinite Marketplace. If you want people to be able to use your content beyond Infinite, then you should release it with the OGL or ORC and the Pathfinder or Starfinder compatibility license.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're running through it. Next question. If Pathfinder Infinite cannot use the org, then how does that work with packages for Foundry and Path Builder?
I can't speak for Path Builder. They're not an official partner of Paizo's, and so I'm less familiar with how they work. But for Foundry modules, as long as the module itself is being sold exclusively on Infinite and doesn't itself contain material that would require the orc instead of the Infinite license to publish, it's totally fine. Infinite doesn't require that you release something as a PDF or an EPUB or whatever. So if you're selling a VTT module in a different file format, that's still permitted.
Cool. Mark, can you distribute Infinite Foundry modules through Foundry's own marketplace?
No, that would violate the Infinite exclusivity agreement.
Great. Thank you very much. If you want to use something from a book which is not under the orc, say Horde Lich from the Book of the Dead, would you be unable to reference that creature because that book is under the OGL? What about the vast number of NPCs in the Game Mastery Guide that weren't reprinted in the GM Core? Can you simply mention a name? How does the answer differ between publishing under Infinite or Pathfinder compatibility license? Okay,
so this is a great question, and I know we're trying to go quickly, but this is, I think, a pretty a good use case or a good hypothetical. So it really gets into the nuance of the overlapping licenses. So in this case, the Horde Lich, that's a Paizo creation. It first appeared in Book of the Dead. The OGL is strictly a downstream license in this situation. So since the Infinite license is also a downstream license from Paizo products to other publishers' works, this is covered by Infinite and can be referenced in any Infinite release, whether that release uses the OGL or not. That's also the case for NPCs in the Game Mastery Guide, or really any NPC ever. If you're just referencing it by name and not reprinting it, you could reference anyone from the generic bartenders and cut purses in Game Mastery Guide to named NPCs like Karzug or whoever, who both use open game content within their stat blocks and in non-OGL Infinite releases. So they're like Russian nesting dolls in that regard, where the licensing of nested material doesn't really matter so long as the outermost doll is clearly open game content, is clear of open game content.
Mhm.
The compatibility license only grants you access to limited Paizo trademarks, like the compatibility logo and such. So you still need to fall back on another license to access the content itself. If you're not using our setting, then that license can be the OGL or the ORC. But if you're using any of our named NPCs, for example, then the license you're falling back on is the Infinite license. In this case, you'd still need to use the OGL to reference the Horde Lich or the generic NPCs from Game Mastery Guide, and couldn't reference any named NPCs at all without Infinite.
Cool. Mark, if you make 2E conversions of 1E Adventure Pass and you're referencing a book published under the OGL, let's say Adventure Pass, A Song of Silver, then do you have to publish the conversion under the OGL? You're not reprinting the whole book, just creating a supplementary document that makes minimal sense without the context from the original book.
Yeah, as long as you aren't including anything in your conversion that Paizo doesn't own, then you're good. In the case of that adventure, you'd need to avoid referring to some of the characters as tieflings. That's a word that Wizards of the Coast owns, and you'd have to call them Nephilim instead. You'd have to do the same stripping of the open game content that Paizo did when we made the remaster, basically. But anything that Paizo owns, like the story, the characters, and so forth, you're free to use under the Infinite license.
Awesome. Speaking of which, can you publish fiction set in Pathfinder Starfinder settings on Infinite?
Yes, please do.
Can you publish game materials such as new enemies or new classes for Pathfinder Starfinder Infinite?
Yes, please do.
Going forward, do I need to publish Infinite materials in the new orc-based mechanic systems?
So again, to clarify, I assume that orc-based mechanics means remastered rules. The orc itself doesn't have associated mechanics. But to answer the question directly, no, you can publish material that's compatible with any version of Pathfinder or Starfinder. But if you're referencing anything that comes from a non-OGL source, like Player Core or GM Core, you can't also reference OGL material. If you want to do a whole book about gunslingers, which haven't appeared in orc release, you can still do that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Does a material currently published on Infinite, which reference spells, need to be changed?
No, nothing currently on Infinite needs to change.
Thank you. Could you publish a product on Infinite that combine remasters, PF2E content, and content belonging to another third-party publisher unrelated to Pathfinder that is published under ORC? So let's say a Cthulhu Finder supplement based on a hypothetical Call of Cthulhu 8th edition released under ORC.
You could not. Since you can't include the ORC in your Infinite publications, you can't pull anything through that license from upstream.
Thank you. All right, I have a scenario for you. You ready?
All right, let me just read it.
What?
Okay, fine, go talk.
Scenario number 1. Person A and B publish similar products. One on Infinite, one on Drive-Thru RPG. Person A publishes first on Infinite with no ORC license. Person B then publishes on Drive-Thru using ORC, confident that they are legally protected since they are only using mechanics, not any Lost Omens materials. Person A, whether a bad actor or just honest person protecting their copyright, sues person B. How would things proceed?
That's not a legal battle that Paizo or Drive-Thru would be involved in any way. That this would be between persons A and B. It sounds like person B would need to prove that they didn't take any copyrighted rules expressions from person A. And since neither is released using the same license that offers protection from lawsuits like this, it's going to be up to the courts to figure it out. But what they decide is really none of anyone's business but persons A and B. In the same way that if someone publishes rules for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle RPG and I publish a second product that's not using a license that they used, they could sue me and say that I'm not. I mean, that's just how copyright laws work. I don't see how that's relevant to Infinite or otherwise.
Awesome. Thank you. How much time do we have?
3 minutes.
We can do this. Go ahead.
We can also go over a little bit, I think, unless Rue tells us otherwise.
Rue's in charge.
But we're going fast. Let's go. All right. Thanks, Rue. All right.
Here we go. All right. Well, Infinite creators have to put the orc legalese stuff at the end of our documents, like we did with the OGL.
No. In fact, you're not allowed to put it in your products at all. That's sort of what the policy does. The only legalese that anyone should be using on an Infinite release is included in the Infinite license itself, and basically says this was released under the Infinite license or community content agreement for Pathfinder Infinite and Starfinder Infinite, and contains copyrights and trademarks that Paizo owns. That's the only thing you're really required to use, regardless of what the content of your material is. If you're also releasing the book under the OGL, there's additional disclaimers and declarations that you have to include under the terms of that license. But the orc license isn't in play on Infinite, so none of the legal declarations from the orc license apply, because it's not present.
Yes. All right. If you're making a third-party PF2R, it is just a function of signing the Pathfinder compatibility license and the orc.
If you're not releasing the product on Infinite and don't need to use other licenses to access any non-orc upstream content, then yes.
Perfect. For Pathfinder Infinite products, if I reference a table from the core book, for example, Party Treasure by Level, then would attribute the CRB in the section 15 of the OGL. If I was to reference the same table from the remaster GM core, what is the appropriate way to attribute the GM core? There is an attribution listing at the back of the GM core rulebook under the orc section. So should I include the credited book name and list of authors somewhere in my product?
No, you'd want to reference the book and page number where readers could find the intended information. So if you're not reprinting the table, you can just say check page 42 or whatever page number it's on in the Game Master Guide. You don't need to cite the book or its authors elsewhere in your Infinite release. If someone wants to know who wrote that table, and good luck figuring that out, which of the many GM Core authors it was who wrote that specific rubber duck, they can look in the GM Core, to find that author information.
Thank you. Can you provide hyperlinks to Archive Nethys in your document without needing to include the OGL?
Yes, unless the human readable text in your book is open game content. The hyperlink or even the contents of the Archives of Nethys page that you're linking to don't matter as much as whether your product itself includes open game content. It's back to that nesting doll thing. The license is only looking at the visible outermost doll.
Yes. Okay. Questions outside of the Infinite Slicing discussion. Is there any word on the community use policy updates, Mark?
Yeah, they're coming soon. And then once I put this particular licensing update behind me and this stream is over and the holiday is behind us, that's going to be a top priority for us, is getting that out. They're close, but I don't have a date to share when they'll be out because there's other people who need to comment and check off on them.
So stay tuned.
Yeah. But again, the community use policy is not directly relevant to Infinite publishing, other than the fact that when publishing on Infinite, you are granted permission to use any image that's in the community use package, which is a bunch of art assets that we've released. So that is, I guess, relevant, but the policy changes and updates shouldn't be affecting that content package at all.
Awesome. Thank you. When making a Pathfinder Infinite book, do we have any obligation to reference orc renewed content, or can we use their old OGL reference? Example, do we have to reference? Oh, so we kind of answered this already, actually, but go ahead.
Yeah, you don't have to reference the non-OGL names if you don't want to. Over time, I expect people will want to build off new releases that won't be able to mix the OGL with non-OGL material. So if you want your products to be carried forward in the Infinite ecosystem into the future, you're likely going to want to abandon the OGL material the same way Paizo has, in order to facilitate the downstream use for other publishers. But if you want to make a book right now called Complete Magic Missile and have a whole bunch of stuff relating to Magic Missile, I mean, you can do that if you want, as long as you're using the OGL.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Mark, what is there to stop anyone from republishing content on Pathfinder Infinite that is published under the OGL or in the future under the org outside of Pathfinder Infinite or entirely for free?
Copyright law. I mean, that's the existence of all these licenses doesn't negate anyone's copyright to their own material. So if someone publishes something without a license to do so, that's illegal and you can get sued for it. And that's it.
Great answer. What specific commitments can Paizo make to support open gaming? Can you specifically commit to releasing all future digital and print contents for PF2E and Starfinder 2E that contain any rules under the org license?
You done?
Yes.
No, I can't commit to that. I mean, we've already historically had content that wasn't released under the OGL, like the Coral and the Deep Crow from back during Second Darkness, or a bunch of Cthulhu related stuff from Strange Eons. There's a big difference between being committed to open gaming and promising that everything we ever produce for the rest of time will be 100% open. I can't foresee every potential situation in which we might not want or be able to make specific content open under the org or another license. And so it would be irresponsible for me to make promises given that lack of foreknowledge. Never and always are two of the most dangerous words to utter as a representative of any company. So I tend not to put my foot in that particular bear trap. But we every product we're working on currently is going to be released under the org or the OGL in the case of Adventures, where we haven't quite caught up to the remaster yet. But yeah, I mean, we've always released as much content as we could under the open licenses, and that's not going to change. So
awesome.
Even if there may be some things down the road where we're like, this thing is super tied to our IP, and we can't figure out a way to release it without giving away more than we want to, and so we'll do so differently. But those are going to be few and far between.
Paizo is not psychic. Very good. Okay, so and they can't see the future, but they're doing their best. Last question, Mark. We did it.
Oh my gosh. Only 5 minutes over.
Does Paizo intend to produce remaster editions of other Pathfinder 2E products and move them to the org?
We don't have anything to announce at this time, but we're certainly aware that there's a desire for us to increase the corpus of org licensed material for the game, both in the future and retroactively. But the remaster was a lot of work that put an incredible strain on our, well, not just the creative team, but the entire company. And so once that's behind us, I think we will certainly look at other material and see what will be involved in re-releasing that material as org content. But we haven't made any final decisions yet, and certainly nothing to announce. But you know, we've still got the Monster Core and Player Core 2 to get out before we can even really think about doing that with, you know, the rest of our stuff. But in the meantime, that stuff still works. It still works with the game if you're a player or a GM, and anything that we didn't bring downstream from a different source works on Infinite as well. So if you want to make an Infinite product that has a whole bunch of rules options for the Magus or for the Summoner, that you release on Infinite, you can already do that without necessarily needing to cite the OGL, which won't release that content into the org, but will put it into the overall, you know, game landscape for people to use at their table.
We did it.
All right. I guess on that note, yeah.
Can I say thank you to some people?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Mark, for handling those questions I really appreciate it. And
I've been
having this
practicing a lot over the
discussion.
last week. Yeah.
You're
So it's,
doing excellent. I want to give a big thank you to Rue, who's a ghost and running the stream. Thank you, Rue, for all of your work and putting up questions and being amazing. Huge thanks to the community for all your questions, and having these types of conversations because they're important. So thank you for taking your time to ask these types of questions. And thank you so much for keeping the conversation going. And yeah,
and
those
thank you
are.
to Helen, one of
Oh my
our
gosh, yes, Helen.
Infinite Masters. There were so many
Best.
questions in so many different places, and Helen did
So great.
a incredible mitzvah for us and combined all of those into one document, so that we could more easily make these title cards and address them all today. I hope this has been informative and clarifying for folks. Again, if we could not use any licenses at all, I would. It would be so much easier for everyone, but that would not necessarily protect our IP, and that's what we need to protect in order to continue to be able to, I don't know, pay payroll and have roofs over our head and stuff. So it's important. Yeah, it's super arcane and complicated, and thank you to everyone for sort of putting up with it. Over time, I think this is just going to fall by the wayside, and we're not even hopefully going to still be asking questions about it, and it'll just become the new status quo of how things work. But in the meantime, do stop by the Paizo message boards, or the forums. Specifically, you can comment on the blog from last Tuesday, to provide additional questions, and I'll do my best as time permits to answer those. And then there's also some great community resources that you can use, both run by our Infinite community, as well as the official ones by Drive-Thru or Paizo, where you can get some additional answers and help and sort of crowdsource some of that clarification. So yeah, thank you to everyone. Sorry we went a little long. I was worried that would happen, but all things considered,
only 10 minutes.
Yeah,
I think
and we didn't have audio for the first minute and a half.
So
that's
technically 8 minutes we went over.
Yeah,
number one.
That's fine. Yeah.
Also a big thank you to Helen too, and also the Infinite Masters and the community too for helping us tighten up frequently asked questions as well. In our Pathfinder Infinite, Starfinder Infinite FAQ, even if it was something smaller, minor that needed some clarification, that was super helpful. So you'll see those changes are live as well. And if something doesn't make sense, let us know, or you need clarification, because it is a living, breathing document. We are happy to be more specific. So just let us know. And in the meantime, we hope everyone has a super great week. And thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it.
And if you're in America and you're celebrating Thanksgiving or whatever you may celebrate this week with family, hope you have a good time with that too.
Awesome. I'm just waving then, Mark. I thought we were committing to a bit. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.